T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Fuck you, Westport! Westport going to weed! Westport going to weed!
You mean am I still having nightmares? Don't know where they're coming from. Or what they're trying to tell me. What they're trying to tell you is you need a holiday. Welcome to Amsterdam. This is Snoozle Bar. Only $7.99. You are on a journey, Cannaman. Someone's wanting us dead. It's down to us, Donny. Goodbye, Mr. Cannaman. This is going to be a nightmare.
Hey everybody, Chadwestport here, and that was the official trailer for the Cannaman TV movie coming up, and I have its creator right here with me, Mr. Conor Macleod. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome, man. And thank you for joining me so much. Like, we've actually been able to chat here a little bit in the background to get going, but I was drawn to you a few years ago on YouTube. You are doing one of the things that I think is the most important thing for anybody who loves this plant and wants to advocate for it to do. You are talking with people whose life has been greatly impacted by cannabis, sharing the stories of patients, how this plant can be medicinal. And as somebody who came from the medical side myself, back in our medicinal system, I saw a lot of that, and it was great because that really changed the minds of the public. But here, since it's gone legal, I don't really see that much anymore. And it kind of breaks my heart because that's what a lot of us feel is so important about this plant. And you are out there getting a lot of these stories across. So that's a couple years ago. I'm going to ramble here. But that's, kind of what drew me to you. You're multifaceted, though. You do a lot of things, and I definitely want to touch on those here. But maybe we can just kind of rewind a little bit. I might be getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about your personal journey with cannabis. Like, where, and kind of how did that start? And was there a significant medicinal recognition at that time? Or was it kind of something you realized later? You're like, this is helping. So what was your introduction to cannabis?
Essentially, I started consuming cannabis when I was about 13, something like that. And I just kind of seen it as, I don't know, it was more like, it was something that it was discussed out with the norm of other substances. So it was like you talk about substances at school, teachers or parents and, relatives that were older, they talk about drugs, but then there was cannabis. And that's what I remember most is like there's drugs and then there's cannabis. And it would be implied that it wasn't good. But there was never an explicit overtone of like, you have to stay away from it. That's what made the exception. And so I got, with 13, it was just school accessible. There wasn't really any basis behind it other than intrigue, inquiry. And that's where it began. And the first couple of times, the first time I consumed cannabis, I didn't feel anything, but I didn't inhale, didn't do it correctly. And then the very first time I consumed cannabis, I was standing with a couple of guys that were older than me, and this guy, I was essentially making what we call a bucket, but it's a bong. It's a homemade bong essentially. And essentially, yeah, there's no point in me describing what it is, but it's essentially a homemade bong. And the guy was like, "There you go," and I like took it down, had the bong, and I was like, "Oh, I feel fine, I feel fine." But it was the energized response, and I was, "Oh, I feel fine, I feel fine." And the guy that did the rounds, there was 4 of us, and then the guy was like, "Oh, you want another one?" But he was doing it because he knew I was fucked, and he was just like, "This guy's he's going to have an unpleasant evening." And he's on, and I'm 14, 13, so I'm like, "Yeah, oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." The moment I had the second one, I went into what I would regard as a dream state. I was just totally fucked. Like I was just like, "Oh, this," and I remember to this day sitting because then we sat on the guy's front step, and I remember thinking to myself because I'm talking to one of the guys, the other 2 went in the house where they lived, and I'm talking to him, and all I could think in my mind was, "This is a weird dream." And I thought I was at home in my bed, and I was like, "This is bizarre. This is such a weird dream." It was just too much, just too much. So that was my introduction. Disorientation. I walked up the road and it was just that kind of thing. Overwhelmed, really. Didn't enjoy it. And it just kind of started there. It was something that you did socially. It was just kind of like you play football or mess around or what, and then you did this when there was nothing else to do. And it kind of started there. And then I started realizing that 15, 16, I had like parents that consumed cannabis off and on. There was like older cousins and relatives that I was like, oh, this is okay. This is not. Nobody described it openly, but it was going on, and you noticed it, and it just kind of the journey went that way. By the time I got to about 18, I'm kind of going to college, and so I'm doing gardening and all these different kind of things, and it was kind of bizarre. So I'd be doing gardening whilst consuming cannabis, and it was just kind of that back and forward, and that continued on. I would be drawn and stuff like that in the background, and just essentially. By the time I was a regular consumer since about 14, 15, but just I don't know. I'm always analytical. So when I've been consuming cannabis, one instance I remember my mum, she's seen this. I had a hash like burning my t-shirt, and I was again 15, and she got upset, and she was like, "Oh, you're taking drugs," and she got really distraught. And I remember sitting there like, "No, it's like this isn't like." I was upset because my mum's upset, but I remember also feeling this conflict of this is not proportional to what I'm doing. Like this isn't consistent with the experience I'm having.
Right.
And that's kind of where it began. It was just this kind of, and then inevitably, as you're consuming something, there are different varieties that pop up, different methods of consumption. So you're learning the intricacies, the mechanics of cannabis consumption generally through plant material or through paraphernalia. And that's where the knowledge, as you're 14, 15, 16, 17, these things are changing as time goes on, inevitably. Hash would be then turning into homegrown because more people were growing at home. Hash in Europe became like almost non-existent as a consequence of geopolitical reasons elsewhere, all these different kind of things, and that just evolved over time, and it got to essentially where it is today, which is so far from the beginning.
It really is far from the beginning, but it sounds like it was definitely treated as something that don't do. It's it can wreck your life, but it also doesn't sound demonized to the extent of like other drugs. Like there was a delineation between the two. Whereas here in the States, everything is kind of fear-based, so it just gets lumped in with everything. And you noticed some of these things you were told weren't true. And I think that for a lot of people who start younger, myself, we started the same age, we've had no reason to really not believe adults in the past or, authority figures. And then these types of things sometimes kind of like opens a little crack in the mind of like, what else am I being lied to about? Because this isn't my experience.
100%. And what's interesting as well, as time goes on, not only do you lose trust about the abstract authority of those that are older than you telling you something. You kind of lose. There's a fractioning, fractured element in the trust element because you've been told something. But as time goes on, you start to realize that it's not even on many of the cases like them being purposefully they're lying. They were just misinformed. They had no idea. They were told this rhetoric. They then adopted that rhetoric with putting no inquiry in it whatsoever, and then they were spewing it out to you. And what I've noticed, what's interesting, is that individuals such as ourselves, the generation which, I know that you go back to the 60s and 70s and there was that dynamic, but it seems to be much more explicit now because the individuals that are smoking cannabis culturally, it's in alignment with a global movement of change, and that's different from the 60s and 70s when it came to cannabis. This is unprecedented what we're experiencing at the moment. And I think that what's helped the previous generations break their stigma is that they're seeing their children who they trust, and they trust their judgment. They've seen them developing as adults and being like, no, 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 and then informing them. And there's been a loosening of that rhetoric that was kind of ingrained years ago, you know.
Good point. Very good point. Yeah, it's, I always advise, be cautious with the conversation, have it at the appropriate time, but have the conversation about cannabis with, children or the youth. You might not have kids, but there's the neighbor kid who you could tell is maybe going down the wrong path or whatever. Make yourself available. Now, I noticed this isn't a Texas accent that you have, so it's a little bit different, but it makes me wonder, what was the accessibility to information for you like? Was it top secret, clandestine, hard to find, or how did you kind of get turned on to some of the educational aspects behind the plant?
I think it was through. I remember. So this is what's so bizarre, Chad, about generally the basis of even life, right? So I started studying cannabis. I did an essay in 4th year, and it's awesome because I've just remembered this, and this is the first time I've remembered this in years. Thank you, man. Thank you very much. So in 4th year, so I'd be 16 by this point, we had the opportunity in English to write an essay on something socially, something sociologically. And I was like, well, I'll choose cannabis because I'm cannabis proponent and I'm fucking smoking. I'm a teenager. I'm just getting stoned all the time. This is my life, getting stoned all the time. And that's it, and I was like, so I'll write it on this. So as a consequence of that essay, that was the first piece of research that I remember. So I was like, so I had to then study so I'm 16, so 2006. The internet is relatively new, but it's established enough that there's an abundant source of information that I can access through typing a keyboard, And so I was like, well, this will be fine. So I started finding out things in the UK about the Legalized Cannabis Alliance and these very old organisations that are no longer in existence anymore. But interestingly, the individuals that were participating in those organisations are still present to this day in various roles relating to cannabis. And these are the same individuals. My very first interview was with a gentleman who was part of the Legalized Cannabis Alliance, and I wrote about him when I was 16, and I didn't remember until I was sitting talking to him. I was like, oh, wait a fucking minute, I remember. And it was so peculiar. And that's where, so when I was 16, that's when I started realizing, finding out information about the cannabis framework in the UK. And as a consequence of that, you kind of, you peripherally see politics relating to cannabis internationally, and as a consequence of that, and so I kind of seen fragments of that, but I focused kind of exclusively in the UK of like, what's going on here and stuff like that, and finding out like that was the big thing in 2006. I was like, there's an endocannabinoid system, what the fuck's this thing? And that was a big deal because it had only been 4 years. I mean, obviously I'm aware that at the beginning of the 90s and stuff like that, but I think it was 2002 that Russo came up with the endocannabinoid system deficiency. So the ball was really rolling by 2006. So and then I was like, what, do you know this? So as a 16-year-old, I mean, I'm relatively fucking manic now, quite honestly, but as a 16-year-old finding out about something, this vast medical like complex system that's crucial to every function in your body, and then you're looking at adults that are going, that plant that stimulates that same structure, that's bad for you and get away from it. You're like, you're losing your mind, and that's where I remember 2006 being a real accelerant of my approach to cannabis. And I mean, I remember around about that time, I remember I watched, I think it was Harold and Kumar, get the munchies, and I remember lying on the couch, and it's the scene where he's running through the field, and Kumar's holding the cannabis bag, and I remember sitting there thinking, I think I love cannabis, with real love, like you would love a sibling or a fucking partner or a pet. I was like, I think I love this thing, and I remember that moment, and I was about that age. That was a good film.
That's a good feeling too. I've had that feeling. It's definitely, there's a relationship with the plant that's special, man.
Yeah.
So it's cool that you kind of started early, and too, the big circle on it is the people that you were researching and looking up to previously. You're now amongst them as peers, working with them and coordinating education. And I love that you mentioned, Dr. Ethan Russo, because it was, for me too, it was one of his papers that just blew my mind about endocannabinoid system, and then taming THC in 2011. I'll never forget that paper because that's kind of about terpenes and, synergistic or entourage effects. And I haven't been right ever since.
It's interesting actually. Even a couple of hours ago this evening, I had Dr. Peter Grinspoon on the channel, so that'll be coming out next week. And
That's
that was
awesome.
phenomenal talking to him about that, because he was saying the same thing about the endocannabinoids, and it was a great conversation to have. And when you're saying about the Pierce thing earlier tonight was one of those moments where I was like, fucking hell, this is bizarre. You know, the life's bizarre. I'm just sitting like this is, Lester Grinspoon's son, because he's like Godfather level stuff, So yeah, it's just a really peculiar cyclic life that seems to be present.
Well, it's cool that it's almost maybe validation of our own passion. It's like, cool, we're on the right path because our passion is leading us, our motivation is driving us, and we're we're in good company. So that's kind of a good check on how we're doing report card, because we always or at least me, I always tend to look forward. I try not to look backwards, and sometimes you miss some of
Yeah.
those things you should be proud of.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I agree with that fully. I mean, to be honest, Chad, the work that you do is almost fucking unrivaled, man. You're everywhere, and this is what's
Thanks.
bizarre. Like Future Cannabis Project and the other, everything else you're doing, the work, when you're putting up your posts and stuff like that, man, you're looking at a Wikipedia segment often. That's what you're looking. You're like, oh, quality. I'm about to find something like I'm finding myself not questioning it. It's just like this is like a anatomical description of some form of cannabinoid interaction cultivation basis. That's what it's like. It's phenomenal.
Well, like you, I get to hang in good company, and I have a regular on my channel, Dr. Miyabi Shields. She has a PhD specializing in like CB1 receptors and enzymes specifically. So
Right.
I have good people I can ask my questions to, which is awesome.
Certainly helpful anyway.
Definitely.
Well, here it is, Donny. It's time.
Time for what?
Inside this box contains the world's most precious cannabis bud. I got it from a mysterious source deep in Southeast Asia. Legend has it was grown by the hands of an ancient alchemist, harvested by elders deep in the Himalayan mountains, and cured over the course of 200 years by mystics, handed down from generation to generation until the correct time arrived. I was given this by a Buddhist monk who'd been instructed to find the one that this last final bud should rest with. And I was that one. Donny, my friend,
Yeah.
we've had our fallouts, and we've had our laughs, and I would be honoured to share this smoke with you, my friend.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Now let's get stuck in. What the?
Huh? Oh yeah, I smoked that.
Oh, you lousy fuck.
All right, we're back. I hope you guys all enjoyed that one very much. Now, you can definitely find the full collection in a variety of places. I actually have the book, Cannaman, the first 33. I'll edit in a better picture for us later. This was your first comic book, and this is available on Amazon. I know that much. But
Yeah,
tell
sorry.
us, yeah. So the channel started about 3 years ago, and it started with what you're calling couch skits. And I thought it was a very clever way to inform people about cannabinoids, terpenes, endocannabinoid system, these basic type of concepts that we now build off of. What was your initial thought process with that, as far as like, well, if I do it in this manner, I think I may reach more people? Why the comics?
I loved artwork the entire time, and obviously cannabis has always been on my mind the whole time. So it's just it was kind of like a, excuse the pun, but like, it was a synergy there. It just they merged together as a consequence. Yeah, it was just it was an organic move essentially. I wanted to interview people, and also wanted to make people laugh. So yeah, it was it was something that happened in spite of me, really.
That's cool, man. I'm glad that I love it when I see two passions merge in artisticness. I have that as well. I'm not that creative a drawer, more music, but yeah, when those two things merge, and for some, go back to synergy here, cannabis for a lot of people tends to stimulate creative thoughts or creative, just inspiration. Has cannabis kind of helped you in that way?
100%. I mean, that's interestingly, actually, because that stuff earlier. the reason why cannabis has, there's a couple of points actually. Cannabis, when you're studying cannabis and creativity, the literature's kind of thin. It's kind of uncomplimentary as well. Cannabis apparently doesn't stimulate creative thought. And if what it's done, one of the studies that came out, they said that cannabis doesn't encourage creative thought. It makes the individual think that thoughts they've had are more creative than they are. That's what they said. And I was like, that's a bizarre roundabout way. It's like they're not actually more creative, they think they are. And it was because the word they used was because they're more jovial. So they're like, oh, this is, and that was the word. And I remember being like, that's a peculiar thing. Now, if you look at, and this is very one-sided, obviously, but if you look at authentic, legitimate studies on neurological activity as a consequence of cannabis consumption, the most explicit representation that it stimulates creative thought is that cerebral blood flow is increased to the frontal lobe, and frontal lobe is largely impactful when it comes to creative thinking. And this is that's a neurological link there that clearly indicates it can impact legitimately, and that's on a neurological basis. Like subjectively speaking, cannabis is like it's it kind of like it's the fuel. It's the fuel to the engine that's continuously running every day. I went about 3 months or so this year, maybe 3.5 months without consuming cannabis. Just decided to take a break. I was like, it's good to, when you're consuming cannabis every day, when you get being not under the influence of cannabis makes you feel high bizarrely. There's at the very minimum,
Yes.
it gives you a different sensation,
Yes. It's a
And
new
then
normal.
yeah, the new normal, exactly. And that's what I was like, that's what I was looking for. So I was like, yeah, the indeterminate time, I'll just kind of stop smoking for a bit and just, just see how it goes. And in that time period, I still was, that's 3.5 months. The content didn't slow down, productivity didn't slow down. But what I did notice was that so the way I describe it is that when you're not consuming cannabis over that period of time, I see it as you're kind of fishing at the side of a lake and you're pulling out one fish at a time, and that fish represents an idea, and you're just kind of pulling out one fish at a time and you're throwing it back in that process repetitively. Now, after a couple of tokes of cannabis, a cannabis joint, it's kind of like it's no longer a lake, it's a running stream and the fish are jumping out of the water. That's what it's like. It's like the ideas are immediately accessible. There's an overwhelming abundance of them, and it's like there's just 100% there. And that's my experience that cannabis instigates that. Now, if you're heavily fucking stoned, it's dose dependent. Like a lot of cannabis, it's dose dependent.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main thing. And like I said, I've got friends that are, their tolerance is insane. As I'm sure you're the same. It's that you have people that you're like, these people are like, you've got a Snoop Dogg in your clan, that kind of shit. There's a Tommy Chong nearby somewhere. And what I've noticed, because I said that to the fella the other day when he was like, he has like a gram a joint, and I was like, a gram a joint? That's insane. That's like in my mind, like, so my response was, do you know how sensitive receptors are? Like, do you know how sensitive these things are? Now, bear in mind, it's all subjective. Like, that's like at one point, you go back 5 years or whatever, I'd be in the same circumstance. There's periods of time in your life where priorities shift. And at this moment in time, it's not, the priority is not, it's still for cannabis, it's still to study it, it's still to create, animations and content relating to it. But my focus at this moment in time seems to be more of an existential one. It's more along the lines of, the philosophy of life type thing. I don't know if it's just a transition of what I'm stage at or whatever, but yes, I feel more about my interest in life is more greater than my interest exclusively in cannabis at this moment, There is an underlying geometric basis to reality, which has been identified through mathematical formula. The interconnectedness of all of existence, which is seen on a micro scale as geometric fractals, are displayed on the macro scale as the repetitive daily actions of everyday life. The role consciousness plays in this is dualistic. 1. Providing an internal orientation for the collective mind as it responds to external reality, and 2. Providing forward trajectory in the direction which the underlying geometric basis indicates. Even on the level of conscious thought, geometric repetition displays itself, seen in the widely recognised stages of the human lifespan, and the correlating priorities associated with these stages, which are universal. You're a dick.
And I briefly kind of touched on this earlier is, a lot of the interviews that you have done on your channel have been with, patients or people who have directly benefited from cannabis. Has that experience maybe kind of like matured your perspective into it being something, greater, like you were just saying?
100%. I mean, I think the most moving element of interviewing those patients explicitly was when I'd be interviewing individuals who had children that were dependent on cannabis, and they would send me over video footage in order to include it into the edit. And the video footage would be disturbing. You got a child that's fitting, a child that's seizing, a child that's getting physical head injuries as a consequence of not having a plant, which is like it should be a human right, And I think that those were the most moving elements of it, because you're watching it in first hand. I mean, there'd be times when I'd be sitting and it would be on the screen, and like my partner at the time would come in, she'd be like, "Jesus, what the fuck are you what?" And I was like, "No, this is I have to the person's asked me to put this in," that kind of stuff. And the reason as well, because sometimes they'd be like, "Oh, are you sure you want this kind of content?" And I was like, "Listen, people need to see this, because what they're showing is they're showing that distraught circumstance, and then you apply a plant that's just it's necessary for our being, and immediately they're now playing the computer." I did an animation about it actually. It's called Epilepsy. Wait a minute, what's it called? I think it's it's called something to do with that. I've got a wee kid it's the same thing where it's like no cannabis with cannabis or without cannabis or epilepsy or something like that. But that's what's touching on that individuals, not just children, require something that's it's benevolent. It's not harmless, but it's certainly not malevolent. So and it's just that's what's been most explicit, and I think you only ever really see that when there's somebody when it's based at affecting somebody's quality of life. That's when you're dealing with somebody that says, "I enjoy this sensation. Yeah, I enjoy coffee." Yeah. It's not worthy of like a moving position, whereas this is kind of like, it was worthy of that.
100%. And that's the uncomfortable fact and the uncomfortable truths that they're uncomfortable to see, but the fact and the truth is what this plant can do to help that. And it takes sometimes seeing something that sets you back to be like, wow, there really is a benefit, because I don't want to watch that ever again. That's a little extreme, but I think you get what I'm saying there.
That's how I felt. Every time I was like, I don't want to see this, because I've got, I don't want to see this. That's just, it's disturbing. So it's like, this is, and then, because then you watch, I'll obviously be doing that. And then I'd watch the news, and then I'll have, fucking 50-year-old white men standing in a fucking politician saying, going, no, we should keep this fucking ban. This is not a good thing. It's like, but you go back to with your Bentley and your fucking, it's like, and so it's that dynamic, that polarized position. It's like, no, there's an error going on here.
Now, maybe touch on that, kind of what the environment is like in Scotland, as far as, legality, as far as medical, and just the general, feeling. In America, a lot of people will, they're more open to the idea of medical use here, even if they don't agree with cannabis per se. Is it similar there? What is it like over in Scotland?
So it's interesting. It's kind of almost multifaceted in a sense. So an example is I was in Edinburgh a couple of weeks back, and you're walking down the street, and every 10 meters you're smelling cannabis, right? It's illegal over here, right? It's illegal when you enjoy it. But if I had a medical issue that I went to the doctor. So essentially what we have here, we have kind of like the structure as it's laying out at the moment. Cannabis is illegal, right, to be used recreationally. So if you had cannabis on your person, then they were to be stopped. You can be charged, and you can be, like taken off you, all these kind of things. That is possible. But that same person, if they had went to a doctor and been prescribed 2 different medications for a condition, and they felt no relief from those medications, they can then get a consultation piece of paper essentially from that doctor and go to a private clinic. There's one in Aberdeen, there's one in Stirling, I think there's maybe one in Glasgow, I'm not sure. So they go to a private clinic, Sapphire Clinics, and they take this piece of paper from their doctor. The doctor said this person's not been hit, and then they go, I want to try this medicine. So they go in and they give the permission from their doctor essentially to say, I can get this fucking cannabis. But it's private clinic. So initially your first consultation is like 50 quid. And then after that, you get like 28 grams, I think, give or take, for about £150 essentially. And you get that monthly. So it's 150 quid a month, and then you get an ounce essentially every month, which is strategically, in my opinion, just below street price. And it's that kind of
Yes.
stuff. So, and I think that's what's there's that medical element where cannabis. So you could take that prescription, that medical prescription, you can smoke it at your work, you can smoke it in public places because it's a medicine. You can be discriminated against. The people that are saying that you can't consume it in these places, you can discriminate against. These people can be taken for discrimination because it's a medicine by this point. But if you're not go through that process, and you're to smoke cannabis in a public place, you're a criminal, and you can be going to jail, and it's that kind of stuff. So there's that. Now, the vast majority of people in Scotland have no idea that that's even a fucking thing. Most people in Scotland have no idea that these clinics are around. There's only 2 or 3 of them. And the news that cannabis is able to be accessed through medicine that way has been purposefully hidden, because what they're doing is they're creating a privatized medical cannabis network in the UK generally, but if we're just sticking to Scotland, and they're trying to keep it under that umbrella essentially. They're not putting it. We have the NHS, the National Health Service. They're not putting it over there. They're putting in place ridiculous roadblocks to say that there's not enough specific evidence that we need for an unlicensed medicine, even though they have numerous other unlicensed medicines that doesn't have the research. So there's that inevitable lobbying almost to an extent. So and vast majority of people don't really, unless most people aren't really fussed. Like if you meet somebody that's like, cannabis totally terrible, but you're kind of like, mate, you just broke out the fucking 80s. What is this? It's like that kind of thing. But most people, then you can go into, so you've got the medical element with private clinics. You can also walk into, even though it's illegal on the psychoactive substances bill to have a THC, but then you can walk into like a food supplement shop, like a Holland and Barrett or whatever over here, and you can buy CBD products like openly, like the same value CBD products that's in registered medicines in the NHS, such as Epidiolex. It's the same percentage. What you're dealing with is a purity difference, really. You're dealing with somebody that's less regulated. But again, that's also another part, because we're dealing with a regulation turnover when it comes to CBD, and it's been ongoing since about 2009. Maybe 2020 or something like that. So it's the Novel Foods Act. That's essentially what's led to a vast number of CBD products being removed from the shelves, in theory anyway. They're being removed from the shelves because they've not conformed to regulatory requirements. Now that's where the conflict comes in, because the regulatory requirements are relatively ambiguous. The word when the last time I was looking at it anyway. So or at the very minimum, maybe not ambiguous, but unreasonable. These kind of things, and there's a thingy there. But again, that was about a year ago that I was looking into that stuff, because I spent a while interviewing people, lawyers and stuff like that was relating specifically to that. The landscape for that is inevitably evolved as these things do. So, but I am aware that some of the individuals that introduced CBD products to the UK had to fall away because the application process to validate your products was ridiculous. It's £300,000-400,000, and even when they'd fill out the application, it'd be going through to the people that were looking over the information. It was like error continuously. This is what it's kind of like at the moment for CBD. So but on the ground, people are kind of, they accept it. If you're walking down the street smoking a joint and there was children nearby, folk would be like, come on, what are you doing? But if you're walking down the street smoking a joint and there was adults, most people wouldn't be bothered.
Well, that's good to hear. For the most part, the medicinal appreciation for it and protection sounds like it's there, which is good. Sometimes we see systems rolled out silently. So the people that are very clued in and tuned in, they know about it. But the general public, to avoid, IRE or to make sure you get reelected, you don't really hold a press conference and let people know.
Yeah.
So that may sound like what it is, the soft launch, and that does allow industry players to get established and gain market share. So kind of to what you're alluding to there, I'm sure they're looking at how our markets are playing out over here as well. So it'll be interesting. I think that area will be hopefully adult use sometime in the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, in the past couple of weeks,
the place to start.
The past couple of weeks, Scotland has implied strongly that they're thinking about decriminalising all drugs, but this is a rhetoric that's been said before, and so it's not really been taken seriously. But these things have happened in the past, so it's time will tell. But it's definitely, I mean, cannabis it's not the way it was now. That's why when I talk about it openly, obviously, but it's not. I don't know. I don't even watch mainstream news, so I don't even know if they're still promoting the same skunk rhetoric. If they're still, I don't know how much coverage there is, So I don't know really.
Yeah, it's great that you mentioned skunk, because skunk in the U.S. everybody's chasing what we called skunk in the '90s. It was just offensively odorous. There's many rumors of why it's not here. The most popular, probably the best urban legend, which there is some truth to, is it just stank so bad the houses would always get busted, and so people just quit growing it. But
Yeah.
skunk over in the UK is just for potent weed. Like that's a catch-all
Yeah.
for potent weed, for street weed, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a scaremongering word. So it's skunk. It's offensive. It's kind of it's kind of explicit. That's what the basis. It's provocative. That's what the word implies. And that's the only reason they do. When if you're talking to somebody and they say, "Oh, that's skunk," you immediately know you're not talking to somebody that's even not only not informed, they're painfully uninformed. That's what, like, if somebody mentions skunk, because and I had a friend and he said that when we were talking, he's like, skunk, I'd be disappointed if I got skunk. He's like, there's way
Yeah.
better varieties out there.
Oh man, I went to my again. I live in a very small town, not a whole bunch of people here, and we've got a mayoral election and city councils. Anyways, election. I went there and they were talking, and one of the candidates was talking about marijuana, and another one of the council members kept saying marijuana, and I know one of the council members, and so afterwards, first I went up to the mayoral candidate who was just like, "It's bad, you're all gonna die," and jump out of the street. And I'm like, I just asked him what it would take to change his mind. I'm not even gonna try if there's no hope. So I asked what it would take, no hope. But my counselor friend, at the end, as I'm leaving, I go up to him. I'm like, "Dude, the '80s called. They want the term marijuana back. We
Yeah.
call it cannabis now." It's just kind of like, oh, so yeah. When people say skunk to you, it's like I hear marijuana, and I'm like, we need to talk.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I'm the same. So at any point, there was a guy we were working maybe last year, and he kept referring, "Oh, that marijuana stuff," and I had to tell him, "Do you understand that that's kind of provocative, man?" I was like, "Marijuana is cannabis. Marijuana is like, as soon as they say marijuana, I think reefer madness. It's like boom,
Yep.
boom, just immediately.
Yep.
That's all I think. It's a trigger,
Yep. Yeah, no, same here. That's what I get. But that is the most education a lot of people, particularly the older generation, have on the subject. So that really is what we face.
Yeah.
How have you kind of helped break, maybe that stigma aside from what you do in the channel? I know you had a series. It seems like every year you go out with the Stoned in Scotland video. Well, tell us about that, and have you had any backlash from that? Like people like, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, to be honest, when I first did that series, I didn't really want to do it, and that's what made me think I better do this. This is probably the right direction. This is probably this. I was like, this is if my body's telling me that, then it's probably going to be the most rewarding element, and that's what happened. It's got the most views on the entire channel. Those 3 videos, that's just the way it is. But yeah, I mean, I've had backlash through YouTube comments, the keyboard warriors and stuff like that. But in person, nothing. The people enjoy
Right.
kind of you what?
Oh no,
Yeah.
I was just agreeing. Sorry, I'm just like keyboard warriors.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
in
exactly.
person it's different. It's totally different.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what. So, and most of the time, quite honestly, if anybody's ever mentioned it in person, they're talking about how it's entertaining. Like, oh yeah, I watched it. Like, I watched that bit to the, and they tell a bit that tell me a moment of the video that I know was nearer the end, and it's I was like, oh, you sat through that video, and retention rate when I'm looking over this, because you're the same, you'll have the analytics available to you. When I'm looking over the retention rate. The retention rate for those videos is like fucking 80% by the end. And the retention the rates for everything else I've done is probably less than 50 or something like that by that point. It's a nightmare. So yeah, so all these things indicate that people enjoy them. And I think what makes it more engaging is that it's in person. Whereas a lot of these Zoom things and that kind of stuff, it's kind of it's not non-personal because we're talking about personal things. This is all relevant to the people that want to watch this, but it's not the same as watching a location that you could then go to afterwards. That's different. When you can like, oh, there's a place there. I'm going to be in that town next week. I'll fucking pop in, and they get a nice sensation from walking in the shop because then they're getting flashes of the video they watched. They're then walking around, and there's a peculiar sensation. They're like, oh, here it is, and I think
Yeah.
that's probably what draws people in more because they can also go. And I did have a few people that had messaged me and be like, oh, I didn't know that's there. It's I'll have to pop in, all these different things. If like some people, if I'm there's a couple of people from Liverpool. They're like, oh, I'm supposed to be coming up to Scotland. I should go in and see what it's going about. So yeah, it's something that I should probably do again. But quite honestly, it's you're outside. Like those 10-minute videos is an entire day more.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So. Yeah, but I should probably. I think recently was it those videos? Yeah, but I think I had somebody that said it to me. It's like, hey, you should start that again. That was kind of cool. I need to still do one for other places, Glasgow and and Aberdeen and stuff like that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, and another great thing about them, and like this is a literal quote from that mayoral candidate, because the actual question came up with is, would you allow a cannabis shop in this town because there's been a moratorium on them.
Right.
He literally said that people on dope jump in front of cars. So this guy seriously believed this, and that statement would apply to cannabis as well. Now that a couple towns near, there's a serious opioid problem, and you do get some people who just walk into the street.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it's not cannabis causing it, but the reason I bring that up is having you walk around and just doing what you do normalizes it for people. It's just, you're not like, it's a butterfly, oh my god, and then you pee yourself laughing. Like, it doesn't happen. So that's important, because a lot of people, like we said with the Reefer Madness, they don't know what it's like or the experience or to see regular people doing it. So again, another awesome part of your channel that people can take advantage of, regardless of where you live. And personally, as somebody who doesn't live there, I love seeing the sites and the architecture and all of that. So
appreciate that, man.
I'm waiting for the next one.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot, Chad. But talking about the like normalizing the thing, that's why I wrote that book, The Case for Cannabis, because it is that, like, talking to people about it. If you cannabis has this illegitimate fucking basis of it, motivational. You consume cannabis, you're not going to get anything done, and etc. etc. And that's what the basis of that book was. It was to provide like this academic background, this piece of evidence to it's like, look, have you done any of this? This is like an academically referenced book. You're criticizing cannabis, and I'm a consumer. I've made this. Have you made this? And it was that at the beginning. Essentially, like, this is evidence. I don't have a white coat. I'm not a scientist, but I can academically research, and I can like draw in together a coherent argument in favor of something that should be a human right, and it's a benefit to the endocannabinoid system, and the list goes on. But that was the basis of that, and I've had more response from when I've talked to people about cannabis, and I've said, I've got a YouTube channel, etc., etc. They're kind of like, yeah. The moment I show them that book, I'm talking to a different person. They're now like, what? Because what they're looking at a thing that they're like, they can't comprehend how this is together. They're like, we try and understand inevitably. So if somebody hands you something and you're like, what the fuck? How did you do this? Their brain starts ticking, and that's like it's a subconscious making them think.
I love that, because I heard a little bit of Donna in that. What the fuck? I heard it sneak in there. And everybody, watch the channel. You'll understand that one.
Donnie's everybody's favorite. Everybody's right. Nobody likes Cannaman. Really, nobody. Every single person. I've had people in Spain email me and tell me that Donnie, it reminds them of themselves. I've had the same description of, like, Donnie reminds me of me. I've heard that from people in England. I've heard, he's just so much like me. And this is the reason why this is on purpose is because I purposely created Donnie to represent the id. And Cannaman's supposed to represent the superego and the ego. It's supposed to be these. So Cannaman's orientated, he's focused, he comes across as relatively wise. That's what he's supposed. Let's think about this, Donnie. That's the id, that's the ego because he's orientated, and the superego because he's rational and wise in a sense. Donnie is the complete encapsulation of the id: pleasure-based, vulgar, desire-orientated. That's what he is, and that's why I was like, initially, that's my thought process. I was like, hey man, I'll fucking make these archetypal symbols which will correspond with the viewer, and that will make them more subconsciously drawn to the character. And that will. I mean, this is the same recipe that's the breadcrumbs have been left from the fucking hell right to the beginning of time, essentially. Archetypal symbology that's drawn you in, the story, the metaphor that's encapsulated the mind. That's just basic fucking psychology from back in the day, and that's what I'm attempting to apply to this. It's like, in a sense, is it creativity or is it just realigning something else,
I look around the world today, and there are still so many people criticizing cannabis. Sin is bad for you. Sin will make you go and sin. Well, to those people, I'd just like to say one thing. Why so serious? Why so serious? Why so serious? Let's put a joint in the face.
What you doing?
Nothing.
Okay.
It's creativity to do that, but it does. The two characters totally appeal to like the two sides of my brains, or maybe I'm sure my life has had many halves, but yeah, my younger half is definitely Donnie.
I
These days, I'm a little more Cannaman.
think that's representative for us all, man. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, what do you have coming up? As far as maybe with your channel, any exciting interviews or some more book work that you're going to be doing?
So, like I said earlier, the next podcast that will be coming up was, so I interviewed Dr. Peter Grinspinella today. That will be coming up next week. Just before that, I had an interview with Dr. Gary Yates 3 or 4 days ago, and that's talking about his album, the Calm Jam, but also talking about the Godstar Paradox, and it was a great conversation. So that'll be coming in the next couple of days. And apart from that, the movie, the movie's going to be getting released. My intention is to kind of like I'm going to screen that in Scotland. And once it's been screened, then it'll be going up to the website, and then people can get it from the website for like £7 or something like that, and then they'll have it for whatever period of time, 5 years or something. I think that's the timeline. I'll have to check again, but you rent it like Blockbuster back in the day. That kind of, you're just renting it. You can do that on YouTube as well. I tried to do it on YouTube, but they don't allow it. It's only for corporations, Universal and stuff. They don't allow the average YouTuber. That was a facility, a thing that was available when YouTube started, and they took it away. So that's frustrating.
I know Vimeo is doing that now. Madam Cannoli just did the Frenchie Dreams of Hashish on there, and I rented it on Vimeo for, I think it was a 48-hour rental, and it was $15 was the price she set, and that was more than fine with me. So yeah, maybe do that, but that will be exciting. And I will put obviously your YouTube and your Instagram down in the show notes as well, so everybody go down there and you can find that. And let's see, I actually had it, so Cannaman TV on YouTube, right, like the little sign right behind Cannaman TV. Is there anywhere else where you want people to find you, or you can direct people?
Instagram and YouTube's the best one, really. I mean, that's really the best ones. That's all the stuff goes on there every day. Sometimes I forget to upload to other places, but Instagram and YouTube is the only ones that I know that it's like in my mind. That's just it's the most popular platforms at this moment. So I think that's why I remember it. So yeah, you'll find all the stuff there.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, right? YouTube, Instagram. Let's see here, because I wrote down some good notes, and I know for everybody watching here, we're recording this late into his evening. So, well, we're past evening. We're into the night at this point. Yeah. So I appreciate your time, man, and I know you got an early rise in the morning. I always kind of like to give the floor to the guests before we kind of close things out, just because sometimes I may not have asked something that you wanted to talk about, or if you have anything really important you want to get out. So this is that time, and I would love to turn the floor over to you, just to kind of put in any final thoughts you have.
Just like to say thanks for having me on, Chad. This has been an absolute pleasure. I absolutely love the work that you're doing. It's phenomenal. It's informative, and it kind of just boosts the knowledge on the daily basis. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, man. And anybody wants to watch your stuff, Cannaman TV, and let's say I've really enjoyed this.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much for making the time. And seriously, I've enjoyed the conversation. I really enjoyed our pre-conversation, and we need to do this again sooner than later. So
100%. And the thing is, Chad, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you. And once it's ready, I would love to see what you think of the movie, because it's like, let's say, following on Patreon and stuff like that, all this, it really helps. And it's taken me fucking ages to make this thing. Like, honestly, it's taken me an enormous amount of time, but labor of love and all that.
Well, you're kind of doing it old school. You actually are kind of drawing some of the things, yeah? And then all of it.
Yeah, all of it. So it's all pencil and paper and pen, all of it. Wow. So and the thing is, there's like over 400 sheets of paper, back and like front and back, that's been done. I showed my son, and he was looking at it. He's like, "What the fuck? How's that?" You know. So yeah, man, it's an enormous project, but again, it's you know, it's for something greater than myself. So
A labor of love, and thank you for doing it. And I hope people get that in their hands. So everybody, you heard him. He also has a Patreon. Check that out. But Instagram, YouTube, make sure you guys go there and give him a follow, and be ready for the movie when it comes out. We're going to play one more clip from the Cannaman TV Couch Skit series. And I hope everybody, you guys all have a wonderful day. Take care. Peace out. See ya.
Thanks, John. I'm standing here outside of the cannabis clinic with a gentleman who has just gained a prescription. Sir, can you tell us a little bit about what you collected today?
Certainly. Today I picked up my first prescription of dried cannabis flower. Inside this tub is 30 grams, which cost me roughly £150. My initial consultation was around £50, and I'll have to continue to pay around £150 a month to keep up with the price of my 30-gram prescription.
I see. And what? Oh, it appears there's a police bust going on right next door to the cannabis clinic. Let's see if we can get a closer look. Excuse me, sir. Can you tell us why you're being arrested today?
I'm getting busted for making cannabis oil and consuming cannabis flower without a private prescription. It's a sham. It's a total sham.
Well, an eventful day at the cannabis clinic. Back to you in the studio, John.
Eventful indeed. Well, I'm joined in the studio now with Cannaman. Cannaman, what do you make of the current UK cannabis structure?
well, John, I'm conflicted. On the one hand, it's finally a relief to be able to access medical cannabis in the UK. But on the other hand, it can only be done so through a private clinic, which directly profits from cannabis patients, whilst individuals such as we've just seen are being arrested if they don't hold a cannabis prescription through a private clinic. This would of course be avoided if we were allowed direct access to cannabis through the NHS. But the UK government's attitude towards cannabis is archaic. One could even assume that this is a long con strategy in the UK, using the guise of ignorance to delay the legislation on cannabis being put through, which allows profit from the privatisation of cannabis medicine, at the same time allowing just enough access of medicine to keep cannabis patients and consumers silent. Personally, I think...
Cannaman, you got to help me. The police are after me for selling bud next to the clinic without a licence and... oh shit!
There he is.
Case in point.
Fuck to Westport!